I'm Anthony Parent of IRS Medic, and today we have Laura Snyder joining us, and she is working hard. You might remember her. She's been a guest before. She's working hard to represent our expatriate clients overseas and all the taxpayers, and she's been doing a lot of research trying to prove to the IRS you're trying to do things that you really don't want to do. So, Laura, you have done a survey. Thank you so much for joining us today. So I want to get right into that survey. What prompted you to do this survey?
Well, obviously, people have problems. People have a lot of problems. But at the time we made the decision to do the survey, we felt that there needed to be more and better documentation of the experiences that people are having. And that's basically what prompted us to do it.
Yeah, and I would say that, my experience from watching things and hearings in Capitol is that the claims people are making, and it's really middle-class people overseas are making, they're not really taken seriously. It's sort of people will just give a stiff arm and say, no. The people overseas are these rich fat cats. And, you and I, we all know that's not the story at all. So let's get in now. I looked at your surveys, and I thought this is really what I want to do, sort of take devil's advocate. I want to take a devil's advocate and say this, Laura. Your surveys aren't really, you cherry-picked your recipients. This wasn't a random chance. These are all people who have volunteered, and the only people who have volunteered are people who have a beef with the U.S. tax system. You really didn't get the public at large. So what would you say to someone who's saying that to you?
Well, I think the first thing I would say is there's a certain number of people who responded to the survey who, they were a small percentage, but a certain percentage of people responded said they don't have any issues and they didn't really understand the purpose of the survey. There are other people in this survey who said that they solved these problems by simply not complying. And I didn't ask. There's nothing in the survey asked, are you in compliance or not? I was afraid to go there. I was afraid that question would scare people away. But there are several people who in the comments volunteered that. They said, I don't have any problems, but the reason why I don't have any problems is because I'm not compliant.
Okay. Yeah. And I think there, you bring up such a great point with that. And this is the folly of, we've talked many times about the folly about trying to extend a tax jurisdiction beyond your physical jurisdiction. That's the problem that the IRS has and always will have. And I just think I saw something, I don't know if you guys saw this going around. There was something like 6%. I don't know who sent this out. There was an alert I got. 6% of Americans overseas are filing FBARs. Someone figured that out. Like, wait a second, looking at FBAR files, looking at the Americans overseas, the compliance rate on FBARs is remarkably low unless, here's the thing, and I'll ask you this, Laura. The FBAR is required for any U.S. person living overseas who has $10,000 or more in the aggregate in financial accounts. And financial accounts, and you're in France, so include things such as Assurance V. So how common do you think it would be for Americans to have an FBAR filing requirement, even if they don't make all that much money?
Well, as you're talking about adults, not children,
right.
Or students, I would think living in France, most people would have that. If you didn't have 10,000 across your accounts in France, you're not living a very good life.
Yeah. And there's certainly people are in some countries, say the Philippines, you could have less than $10,000 but live pretty well because the exchange rate's, pretty favorable. But here, I think that's one of the things. And so we're looking at the amount, and if you think about this, the amount of FBARs filed each year is less than a million. Less than a million FBARs files. I think it's about 600, 800,000. Well, that includes the Americans living in the U.S. who are filing.
Yeah.
So when you're, and if you're really in the U.S., I would say you really want to be in compliance because that's a situation where the IRS has that legal jurisdiction and physical jurisdiction over you. So I think probably even a lot of those are filed by people who are in the U.S. And so here it is, right? We have blatant noncompliance. And what is the IRS going to be doing about it?
I have no knowledge of the IRS doing anything about it.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of your other findings. And I looked at when I was going through your survey, I said, again, to play devil's advocate, Laura, what's going on here? I'm looking at your survey participants. You got 61% women. And so are you just cherry picking women to get the result you want? What's going on here?
Well, I think I have to give you two responses to that.
Okay.
The first one is, well, I've been told that the Democrats Abroad survey also was pretty heavy on women. which I find very interesting. But I would say specifically about my survey, first of all, I would say I organized the survey with a women's organization, an organization for American women living overseas. Now, to my knowledge, there is no organization for American men living overseas. I've never heard of such a thing.
I think that's called Republicans Overseas.
Okay, well, okay. But American women.
That's the closest thing, okay?
There's I don't know how many, at least 10, maybe more than 100 women's clubs overseas in different countries overseas. And there's even, FALCO, the Federation of American Women's Clubs overseas, which oversees all those, many of those American women organizations. So I think that the fact that this was originally organized with one of those organizations of American women's overseas meant that probably more women than men saw our call to please respond. And also, I think women would understand and trust the organization maybe more than a man who didn't know that organization might be less inclined to trust it. But the other thing I would say is that, to my knowledge, there's no statistics how many American women based, as opposed to American men, live overseas. But what I do know is if you look at any foreign exchange program, exchange student program, high school level or college level, what you'll generally see is that about 2/3 of the participants are women and about 1/3 of the participants are boys or men. And I would not be surprised to learn that, in fact, that phenomena carried over into adult life, whereas women, generally speaking, are more apt and more open to leaving their home country and living in another country. And, we could speculate all day as to why that might be the case. But the fact remains is if you look at those statistics for who participate in foreign exchange programs, you'll see much more women than men. So I don't think, I don't think that detracts from the message of this survey. Whether it's a man or whether it's a woman, these are Americans and these are the problems that they're having. And if you look, I think, at the way I set up the survey, I asked a series of questions of the participants. Are you experiencing this type of problem? Are you experiencing that type of problem? And then if you look at the survey results, I break down the results based on how many women said they were having a certain kind of problem as opposed to how many men, how many of that same problem, how many dual citizens as opposed to people who are only U.S. citizens. I break it down by country, how many people in France are having this percentage, are having this problem as opposed to the percentage of people in the UK or in Germany. And so I think what you'll probably see is that the problems certain people living in certain countries tend to have more or less of certain types of problems, and people who have greater incomes or lesser incomes or more assets or fewer assets tend to have certain problems as opposed to other problems. For example, people who have a low income and who are married to non-citizens who have a high income, they're much, much more likely to be taken off of their spouse's joint accounts. Now, if you're an American living overseas married to a non-citizen, but you as the American have a high income, believe me, your spouse who makes less money is not going to ask you to be removed from their account. It doesn't work any other way.
And I would say there's absolutely some really interesting findings, breakdown by countries about where people are having problems. Australia, hard to find help, which makes a lot of sense. We know the whole superannuation issue. Luckily, there's some of the new relief is available for that. Singapore is one that sort of came out high. And there was another one that sort of caught me by surprise, where people are having difficulty having it. And I do, and Laura, it's okay if I share the link to your surveys on this for people who are on. And I do have, I do have it up on my screen right now. I don't think you're able to see it right now. So where is it here? Yeah, there's a few countries in here. And I think, what is interesting is that why I put a lot of trust in your survey, because Australia makes a lot of sense, but there was one that surprised me. But a lot of your countries, I think it was Sweden, or it was Denmark that kind of surprised me.
Yeah, I don't like.
And
Switzerland. Switzerland was almost off the charts.
Yes.
For me, the places where people really had the most problems, but not always the same types of problems, were Switzerland, Canada, and Australia, and then the UK. Those where you where you really saw serious problems, but like I said, not the same types of problems necessarily.
And yeah, exactly. And also, so your survey, because this is the point I want to kind of drive home here, is that your survey, it says 30% women, and then you have a 10.6% that says did not indicate. So, but I would say this, and I didn't think of it before, but now that you're mentioning it, absolutely, women are far more willing to sort of take an adventure. And I could even think of my own family. I have three brothers. I have two brothers and a sister. My sister, when she was 20, went semester abroad. When in her 20s, she went and did a semester abroad in Scotland, and then she joined the Peace Corps as well. Whereas my brothers and I mean, my older brother went in the Army. That was about the extent of his adventure, and I didn't venture too far. So I think you're absolutely true. And I would say this, and I'm saying this tongue in cheek, but I actually mean it. The Republicans overseas, if you're familiar with that group, if you look at the list, it's heavy in men. So I think the thing is if you ran this survey and sent it to Republicans overseas, you would find extreme dissatisfaction. I think you would find different kinds of problems. Because some of your survey ones, I'm looking at this, it's like, yeah, that's not really going to come up. One of the questions you asked was, is someone having an issue with GILTI, which stands for Global Intangible Low Tax on Income, or whatever the heck it is, whatever they needed to make it be. Well, that's something that really only affects a small amount of people who own businesses and who are also aware of it. Because if you ask someone about GILTI, just because they said, oh, no, I don't have a problem with it, doesn't mean they don't. They're just not addressing it. So that's one of the things, and the GILTI is such a huge issue.
Well, not necessarily fewer people are going to say they have an issue with GILTI, because people who aren't entrepreneurs or don't own businesses are not, by definition, not going to be affected by that.
They're just not going to be. That's right. And then also, and I think the other thing too is I mentioned this before, this survey results really lines up with the other ones we've seen. So we're seeing the same things. If we're seeing the same story again and again, no matter what we do, it's sort of saying, you know what, I think this is a big problem. So what are we going to do with this? What are we doing with this survey?
Well, we're trying to, first of all, just get it out there and have people see it. But I've been using it a lot myself in the research and writing that I've been doing, because I've been, trying to talk about the issues that Americans face overseas in a theoretical way, but I want to back it up and say, if I say, look, Americans are experiencing this problem, and this problem, I can go back to my survey, I can go back to the Democrats Abroad survey, and I can say I have proof. I can support those statements that I'm making in the research papers that I'm writing and would like to also, get circulated in the wider public. So I see this survey as kind of serving two purposes. Well, one, it's out there for anybody who wants to use it. They can cite it to support their arguments and the fights that they want to make in terms of how to get the laws changed. It's there for them to use and cite. And I hope that people will do that. It's also there for me to use and cite in what I'm doing. And for me, I'm really grateful to have it. And actually, my personal opinion is we can't have too many of these surveys. Because each one reinforces the other. Each one shows over time that, either how the problems are or are not evolving. And I would hope that over time we could also get more people to understand the value of these surveys and trust a little bit more. I think a lot of people, it's difficult for them to have trust in responding to the survey. They don't know, is someone else going to get their hands on those responses? If I say I don't comply, is someone going to know that I said that? Is someone going to, so there's a real trust issue. So I'm just hoping that I'm kind of just straight off what your question was.
Well, I guess my next question is there another survey you would want to do? Is there something more that you weren't able to get done in this survey that you sort of hope someone else would do, or maybe you want to get to?
Oh, for sure. Like I said, I don't think we can have too many surveys, and I would love the opportunity to do another survey. And because I've learned a lot of things from doing this survey. For example, I think that if you talk about surveys generally, that, you're constantly solicited to do. Most of the time you're being solicited to do that survey, and it's someone else who will benefit from the results. And so people don't want to spend a lot of time on it. It's not important to them. So why are they going to give you more? Yeah. What I learned from this survey is I think there are, not everyone, but I think there's a certain number of people who would be willing to spend a lot of time and answer more questions and give more in-depth information. And so I think I'd love the opportunity to be able to do that. And also I've learned, some of the questions I asked probably could have been asked differently. There's some questions I should have asked and didn't. So I'd like to be able to just take what I learned from doing this survey to make a better survey.
Now, and I would say this, and I think it's great because years ago when we really had the big FATCA hearing, and I believe that was May or April of 2017, we didn't have a lot of things to back us up, and the Democrats were on the committee were incredibly hostile to hearing the fact that Democrats abroad, actual people, were not happy with the Democrat FATCA bill that they passed. And so it was very difficult to get anyone to acknowledge they were slightly maybe we have a couple constituents somewhere who aren't 100% thrilled. That was like the best we can get. We couldn't get them to admit, like, you guys are messing this up so bad. No one likes this. You're not helping out anybody. And I think we have some ammunition here. So my question for you is now, are you able to, is there anyone in the government, have you gotten this to anyone in the IRS and Treasury in front of to sort of say, hey guys, let's try to get the ball rolling on this? Is that something that has happened yet?
In unofficial ways, I have been able to share this with some staffers of some Congress members and have been able to get it into, for example, the Taxpayer First Act Committee, the Taxpayer First Act office. So there's been a certain amount of that, but to be honest with you, I think there could and should be a lot more of that.
All right. Well, now, John, what do you think? I mean, I'm looking at the survey, and it's so thorough. There was a lot of work here. Oh my God, the methodology, and I was trying to play devil advocate the best I could. Laura didn't give me a lot to work with here. So what are your comments on the survey?
Well, I think, first of all, I absolutely commend Laura for the fantastic work she did in putting it together. But look, they're proof positive that it's somewhere between difficult and impossible for Americans abroad to live effectively outside the United States, if at all. For many of them, there's no option but renunciation, and we're seeing that.
And Laura's survey does cover that. And so, again, if you're curious about this, look in the links in the description. You'll see all the surveys. You can download them yourself. And really, I mean, it's an impressive amount of work, I got to say. It's really something else.
Yeah.
There's a whole section on the people who we asked to participate were not just current U.S. citizens, but also former U.S. citizens. And when someone indicated that they had renounced the U.S. citizenship, they got asked a different set of questions than the citizens were asked. And so they were asked, when did they renounce? Why did they renounce? And they were also allowed to just make comments about how they felt about renouncing. And if I recall, there was about 40 some out of the 600 and some participants who had renounced. And I think that's actually a big difference between this survey and the other surveys. All the other surveys I'm aware of did not ask questions of people who had renounced, and there wasn't really any data from that. So now there's some data here of why people renounced, and you'll see that the bulk of them renounced either because they found the tax compliance too burdensome, or because they couldn't get a bank account, or a combination of those two. There was, out of all 40 some of them, only one of them said they renounced to avoid U.S. taxation. One person said that. All the others had other reasons, not that, to renounce. And you'll also be able to read, some of them gave really heartbreaking stories about what it was like for them to renounce, how they felt going through the process.
It is hard it is a big deal for anyone, and I have walked a few clients through the process, And it is an incredibly emotional to go in there and do that, and to really, it's really something else. This is the. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I must
Keith.
interject. This is Keith Redmond. I must interject just to really validate Laura's survey. And this is just my opinion, but I think it's disingenuous for any survey that's being done vis-a-vis Americans overseas that does not address renunciation. And that's why this particular survey that Laura has done stands out from, and DA did a good survey, don't get me wrong,
Yeah,
but
it
stands out from the other surveys that have been done, because you have to address renunciations, because that's part of this total package that is so unjust.
So you know what, and I think, you know what, Keith, I think I glossed right over that, because these are things that you and I know, and we all know. It's like, this is why people really renounce. However, this perception is, oh, this person's going to renounce because of U.S. taxation, as if that's an illegitimate reason. I think that's a great reason alone to renounce. It's crazy. Why not? I think that's a really good thing. Here we actually have some true data on why people actually renounce. And you're right, that is the first time. So that's fantastic that we have that.
Absolutely.
And when you look at, now when you look at the real reasons why people are renouncing, that stupidly high renunciation fee of what, $2,300, $2,350,
yes,
becomes even more absurd. The reason why I'm renouncing is because I can't afford to prepare taxes just to prove to the IRS I don't owe any taxes. Okay, well, we're going to charge you $2,300 for that. You know, it's just so asinine. Really, and I mean, we have the highest renunciation fee in the world. And why? Well, because they got you, right? They know you're going to come up the way to pay it. Or like so many people, you're just not in non-compliance. And I think when you have that level of non-compliance, you don't try it. You don't try. You don't give orders. You can't enforce, and that's what the IRS is doing here.
Right, and I think the last point on the renunciation I'd like to make, because it's always a challenge, and that's why Laura's survey is very good. It's always a challenge to change attitudes and behaviors, especially in homeland America. That Americans who are renouncing, this has absolutely nothing to do with their lack of patriotism to the United States. I know that for a fact. This has nothing to do with it. It's to be able to live. They're still American, maybe not on paper, but it has nothing to do with their lack of allegiance to the United States. And I think that's an important point to drive home to homeland American audience, whether that be politicians or the average person in the United States.
And Laura, your survey, and I don't know if any other surveys cover this. You guys would know this, but what's the number one reason people live overseas? I love this. I love this answer.
The answer was love, basically.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, Lord,
isn't that beautiful?
We all know the number one.
Isn't that
reason
beautiful?
to live overseas. We all know the number one reason to live overseas. Ask anybody in the United States is to avoid U.S. taxation. What, are you kidding me?
One person gave that response out of the 602 respondents. One person said that was the reason why they left, and that person lives in Panama. That particular person who said that.
Especially the accidentals who were born outside the United States. Their whole purpose is to avoid U.S. taxation. You know, I get the feeling you get into a discussion with many people in the United States on this issue. I'm not even sure that many Americans realize that other countries even have taxes. You know, I think they might think it's some, strange invention in America, and perhaps an example of American exceptionalism. But,
John, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
How did I know that? Yeah. But the other thing that's I think both interesting and notable on this is that, the reality is that Americans who attempt tax compliance with the United States, who live abroad, you know this, Anthony, usually do not send a check to the United States because of the foreign tax credit rules and all this sort of stuff. But You know, they are renouncing not because of taxation. If America were a kinder, gentler nation like, say, the African dictatorship of Eritrea, which, you know, imposes basically nothing more than an excise tax, and this wouldn't be a problem. But what the Internal Revenue Code does is imposes essentially a lifestyle, which will punish anything that either doesn't buy American products or this sort of stuff. So the point is that Americans abroad who are tax residents of other countries have reached the point where survival really is no longer an option. And, you know, to be very clear about this, of course they don't want to renounce U.S. citizenship. Well, does anybody want to renounce any citizenship? Of course they don't want to renounce.
Yeah, why? Right.
You know, especially not at the outrageous extortionate fee of $2,350. They're renouncing because they are being forced to renounce, plainly and simply, by, you know, an irrational, unjust regulatory regime that includes taxation. And this, you know, I would point out, is a flagrant violation of Justice Black's decision in Aforium, the 1967 decision, which says that Congress cannot do anything to forcibly strip people of their U.S. citizenship. And this is exactly what's going on. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. The fact is that to be a U.S. citizen and to live outside the United States is the only known instance in the world where citizenship has become a disability rather than an opportunity. In other words, they renounce so they can have a life.
Yeah. And John, and I think, you know, it's I do have this video on green card, problems of green card holders. And, you know, I look at those comments, and a lot of those people aren't sympathetic at all. And I'm thinking, what the hell is wrong with you? So seriously, to all you people, what the hell is wrong with you? Think about this, moron. Think about this. You have a U.S. government that's interfering with your ability to look at the world. There's certain people that don't want to deal with you. You know why? Because you're an American. You know why? Because of the tax code. So think about that. Are you in the land of the free? And why would you give this up? Why would you say, you know what, I want to live in a country that punishes people that go outside the country? Does that make sense to you? Do you think there might be a chance that you might want to look for an opportunity overseas? You know who else found an opportunity overseas? Our president did. Many times. I think both of them, he's married twice, both of his wife were import models. So Republicans, we also like things overseas too. You know, we all do. So let's stop this insular thing that is absolutely so inhumane. And you're not thinking this through. You're only limiting your own opportunities by supporting this nonsense.
Well, you know, Anthony, as usual, you know, you put it, I think, very kindly. I think you grossly understate this. Let me add, okay, to your, you know, I agree with what you're saying, but part of the problem here is, right, this is a problem where the U.S. tax code is being imposed on people who are, you know, trying to live in other countries. So what we have is a situation that's quite interesting where it is a simple fact, okay, and I repeat, this is a fact. I don't think this is a matter of opinion, all right, that what happens is that the United States often imposes direct taxation on things that are akin to welfare benefits or, you know, various forms of social assistance that are paid to residents of other countries that are not even being taxed in those countries. For example, in Canada, there's something called a registered disability savings plan. So, I mean, obviously, these are tax-advantaged accounts that you don't pay tax in Canada until distribution, which are designed to, you know, to benefit a certain group of people who are minority groups that are deserving of government protection. So Canada doesn't tax this. But if there's U.S. involvement, the U.S. will tax this. So in other words, money that is being paid by other governments directly to benefit disadvantaged groups in those countries is being attacked by the U.S. tax system. You know, so it's far worse than the impact of this on, you know, people who decide, you know, to move outside the United States. I think one really must look at the effect of this system on people who are living outside the United States, minding their own business and just trying to have a life. And the U.S. tax system directly tax that. It disables that as an opportunity. And frankly, when the history of this is written, I mean, this is one of the most unjust things probably known to man. But the United States Congress, Senate is an absolute state of denial. Let me give you a current example.
Yes.
Current example. Senators Wyden and Brown recently, you know, they're offering up this bill, which is all of one page, and the purpose of the bill is to legislatively reverse a Treasury interpretation that any foreign taxation over 21% should be excluded from the definition of guilty income, and their justifications that somehow this is a payout, you know, to rich corporations. Are you kidding me? I mean, the whole purpose of this was to allow individual Americans to have, you know, the possibility of a life abroad. Now you have these two senators, again, Wyden and Brown. Now, this is the ranking member, right, you know, who are doing this. And, you know, one really has to ask, what in God's name are they? Well, maybe they're not thinking at all, but what in God's name are they doing? And I think that one could, the most charitable thing that you could say about this, and I think it's true, the most charitable thing, and this is the problem, is that the U.S. tax system is now so complex that not even the legislators can understand it, you know, let alone the end users.
Yeah. No, I agree. Have no clue what it is. And if we tried to run through some calculations, they would have no idea. They're basically an autopilot. And I would say this, here's some action steps for anyone listening to this. That's Sheldon Brown, right? He's Rhode Island. Is that who that is?
I don't know. I
think that's where he is. So,
is it Jared Brown? How many Browns are there? Somebody look.
I don't know. But I think we need to look into that and say, you know what? They are completely out of their minds. Oh my God, they have no idea of what they're talking about. And in fact, you know, anyone who signed, I mean, maybe I think there's an exception, maybe two people who signed for the tax reform actually understood. I actually don't think anyone understood what it meant. You know, because the tax reform was supposed to create, you know, a residency-based taxation for corporations, which it did for large ones. It just happens to be if you're that person overseas, it's like, yeah, you're sorry about that whole guilty thing. Tough luck. So it's so, I mean, wow, these guys are bad. They need to get away. It's like they need to, and I mean, maybe the coronavirus is a good thing we're doing this, where Congress just can't meet. They can't do anything because they don't seem to really quite get it here, that they've created a complete disaster. The fix to your disaster is not adding more disaster. It's actually removing the original disaster. That's the way to do it. But again, you know, that's not the way it works. You know, people won't admit, yeah, this whole idea was completely arrogant. Completely arrogant. It's arrogant, egocentric, impractical, inhumane, a horrible waste of resources for the government, for taxpayers, that destroys love, it destroys families, it puts people on disability, it takes their money away if they want to comply with the law. But generally, overall, most people overseas says, you know what, IRS, come and get me. You ain't going to find me because the country I'm in is going to protect me.
You know, Anthony, here, let me add this, and here's what my current thinking on this actually is. Of course, you know, this could change, but if we look at what Treasury IRS has done over the last year, you know, it has taken steps to interpret laws and regulations in a way that can mitigate some of the disastrous effects of the literal reading of these laws that come out of Congress. Consider this, that really, when looked at from that perspective, it has gotten so bad for Americans abroad that Treasury IRS is now acting in a role to protect individuals from the insanity of these congressmen. I mean, that is a shocking thing. I mean, can you imagine?
Yeah.
People saying, thank you, please, IRS, help protect us from these congressmen. But we see that. It's fascinating, right? Because we see that in this end, you know, in the guilty rules we talked about a couple weeks ago or last week, the whole 3520 issue, right?
Yep.
I mean, this is very, very interesting. It's not perfect. But can you imagine IRS Treasury being the frontline defense for individual Americans against Congress? or from Congress.
Absolutely true. It is absolutely true. This is a situation, let me say this out loud. Unelected government bureaucrat is your friend. That is what we have here.
It's shocking.
It's really
shocking.
I am like, thank God there's someone who has a heart. Thank God for these people in the IRS who are really thinking about this and really thinking about taxpayers. Because Congress, good Lord, no. Congress can't think about anything. They don't read what's in front of them because it's also too complicated. Because again, we're just trying to add to what's already broken instead of fixing what's broken.
Well, they don't understand. So I mean, for all your listeners, individual Americans abroad, maybe they should slow down, take a deep breath, and send IRS, send Mnuchin a personal letter thanking Treasury for its efforts in defending the rights and opportunities for individual Americans from these people in Congress that clearly have no clue what they're doing. I mean, I just find this.
I'm gonna write a letter. I am going to write a thank you letter on behalf of my clients and our viewers to thank them for interpreting rules that don't destroy in a way that don't destroy taxpayers.
I think you should do that. And Anthony, I would encourage you to get Keith perhaps to post the draft of that letter in his Facebook group for comment before that goes in, because I mean, we are living in totally surreal times, right? I mean, we have a tax code that clearly, I mean, on a personal level, I'm sure that these are, nice, reasonable people. It's that they don't know what they don't know, right? This is the problem. Of course, we know on one level, we know the problem with Congress is not that it doesn't care about Americans abroad; it's that they don't care that they don't care. But this is certainly exacerbated by the fact that it's not what they don't know. The problem is what they don't know that they don't know, right? So I mean, it's the perfect storm. Nobody understands the U.S. tax code anymore, and that's another reason why people are renouncing, right? They don't even know what's required of them. Do your clients, when they come to you, Anthony, say, Anthony, I know exactly what's required. I understand this. I just want you to implement my instructions in a specific way. Is that what they say to you, Anthony?
No, they say, yeah, so what's the F-bar? So it's this form. I go like, so what happens if I haven't done that for a while? And then it's like, well, I have a couple other things. And like, all right, yeah. So that's kind of how it goes along. Just sort of a conversation. Well, that doesn't affect me, right? I live overseas. Oh, boy, yeah. So, yeah, we are. And I mean, generally, it's also very true. You can encounter IRS employees who kind of have it out for you, but in my years of doing this, you will find IRS employees who are the only human being you'll find at the IRS. They'll say, okay, and they'll make something go through because they can see the terrible injustice. Now, unfortunately, that's not every case, and especially when it comes to F-bars and that F-bar penalties, which just affects a lot of Americans. This is a separate topic, but appeals is just atrocious. And the IRS is just atrocious on this. And there's really no friends there. But on a lot of things, you can find some real help. Or I should say this, maybe our friends in Treasury can look at, say, maybe how appeals is handling willful assessments. And also maybe Treasury can look into see how good is it to have a civil examiners assess criminal penalties. Let's think about, is that something we want? And is that what they're doing? Let's look into that. Maybe Treasury can look into that. That'd be helpful.
Well, Anthony, part of the problem here, part of the problem, it seems to me, is this, right? That as I've said every time on your show, I make this point. Okay, the biggest victim of citizenship-based taxation is actually the IRS, right? Because of the complexity in administering this. But part of the problem is we saw this through the OVDP disclosure programs and that sort of thing, is that because of the foreign tax credit regime and that sort of stuff, okay, I mean, unless an American does something really criminal, like run a business, okay, they are not, well, it's true. It's true. Look at the guilty and the transition test.
Yeah, I mean, right. Yeah, guilty. Yeah. That acronym was there on purpose. It was on purpose. They contorted themselves to make that acronym work.
Of course.
Well, yeah, I mean, just like FATCA, obviously, and FATCAT, and the crime of having a bank account in the place where you live.
Yeah.
Why would you? I mean, let's focus on this for a minute. I mean, seriously. why shouldn't an American abroad, why should they have a bank account in the country where they live in an online world? Why shouldn't they be required to use only U.S. banks?
Yeah.
You're kidding.
Of course I'm kidding.
All right, hey, I do want to wrap it up here. I want to get some, and now for those who don't, we have Keith Redmond online, and he runs American Expatriates 2.0. You can find him on Facebook. You don't belong there. This video will be posted there, and I will draft a sample letter for comments that I will be sending as a thank you to U.S. Treasury. I won't include any gifts. I don't want to be accused of trying to do anything. Just a simple thank you that, it's not a quid pro quo. Maybe it will sort of inspire them to say, yeah, what else could we do to help people? That would be nice. I do want to finish with Keith. And Keith, what would you say? What do you think we should do next year?
Oh, boy. Vis-a-vis this particular survey, just to kind of circle back with it, I think this survey needs to go out far and wide. I think every American living overseas, whether they be part of American Expatriates, which is 6,500, 6,600 plus members, and others, need to send it to their representatives. They need to send it to their congressmen and their senators, and they need to get on the phone. They can't just send it and not do anything. Just, they need to get on the phone and talk with them about it. It needs to be sent to these committees, House Ways and Means and the Senate Finance Committee. It needs to get out there. It needs to be looked at. I think the repetition and the constant bombardment of it is the only way that we can really work on changing attitudes and behaviors of the politicians in the United States, and just keep at it, keep at it, keep at it.
And I would say, and I agree. I mean, Laura did there's so much work involved here. And if anyone's in academia, and if you're looking at her methodology, you're going to say this is really solid.
And I'm going to say one other thing. Yeah. All American overseas organizations, whether they be Republicans overseas, Democrats abroad, Federation of American Women's Overseas, ARROW, Association of American Residents Overseas, ACA, American Citizens Abroad, they need to send that out as well. And they have to stop not talking about renunciations, because that's part of this. They need to put this in front of Congress, that this is what they are doing to their fellow citizens outside the United States, and not hide the fact that renunciations are happening. It's got to go forward, and this survey shows that.
I absolutely agree. So I think this is our job, Laura. I mean, I think we all owe you a big thanks for what you've done here. Huge thanks. Just great work you did. I think Keith is right. We have to bury Washington, D.C. Everybody in Washington, D.C. has to be tired of the survey. They're like, I don't want to read that survey again. That's what I want them to do. I want exactly what's in here. Idea of this mythology of what's going on overseas is a myth. The reality is it's just normal people who are likely going overseas for love or an opportunity that the tax code is just punishing in one of the most disgusting, inhumane ways. So much so, as John indicated, that IRS bureaucrats can be your best friend. So that's it for now. Be sure to subscribe. Again, the links are below to Laura's survey. Get that out to everybody you can. Make sure everyone you know. This is Anthony Parrott for John Richardson, Laura Snyder, and Keith Redmond. I thank you for watching.